Everlasting, the Legacy Podcast, is the official companion podcast to the upcoming MPB original documentary, focusing on the life of Medgar Evers. The companion podcast, hosted by me, Rita Brent, will feature in-depth conversations, extended interviews, and exclusive archive footage not shown in the documentary. Everlasting, the Legacy Podcast, video and audio episodes premiere September 18th. Find it on mpbonline.org or wherever you get your podcasts. MPB, your stories, our mission.
The nation's longest-running traveling celebration of traditional arts, the National Folk Festival, comes to downtown Jackson for the first time, November 7th through the 9th. A fun-filled weekend for the entire family, exploring roots, richness, and variety of American culture. Non-stop music and dance, folk life demonstrations, hands-on children's activities, signature Southern foods, crafts, and more showcasing the best of America, the best of Mississippi, all free. We'll see you in November. More at nationalfolkfestival.com.
What's happening, Mississippi? From MPB Think Radio, this is The Sit Down, where we explore the ideas and people that are shaping Mississippi's future. I'm your host, Russ Latino. We are joined today by former Governor Phil Bryant. A little bit of news before we get into the program with our guest. We saw 2 judicial appointments yesterday made by President Trump in Mississippi. 2 Mississippi Supreme Court justices were tapped to move up to the federal courts for the Northern District of Mississippi to serve as a federal district judge. Judge Jimmy Maxwell and Judge Robert Chamberlain were both tapped. One of those seats at least had been vacant for a while, and so it looks like those 2 seats will be filled. This will, of course, also give Governor Tate Reeves an opportunity to have more influence in the making of the state judiciary, seeing as 2 Supreme Court justices will now have to be replaced. There is a likelihood or a potential that happens by moving Court of Appeals judges up, which then also gives Governor Reeves the opportunity to appoint some Court of Appeals judges. So we'll watch how all that unfolds. We are headed into hurricane season. There's already a tropical storm out in the Atlantic. Clearly, we are also thinking about and remembering right now, 20 years later, Hurricane Katrina and the impact that it had on Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, and really across the country. The level of devastation was amazing. The resilience that Mississippians showed in the aftermath was amazing. A lot of that was helped by what the federal government was able to do. A lot of that was helped by what Thad Cochran and Haley Barbour were able to pull off in the aftermath of Katrina. There's a lot of conversation around FEMA right now, and so I thought it would be good to have former Governor Phil Bryant in, who has been recently appointed as vice chair of President Trump's FEMA Review Council. Welcome to the Sit Down.
Well, thank you, Russ. And I was just looking at this documentation that was given to me in MPB Katrina at 20 years ago. My time has flown. We may want to say also Trent Lott, who was, if I remember correctly, was the majority leader. Thad Cochran was then appropriations chair. So if there were any good things that came out of that, Mississippi had 2 members of the Senate, along with our congressional leadership, that did a remarkable job in helping bring funding to that cataclysmic event. And that's one of the things that we're looking at now in FEMA is FEMA was designed and did so during Katrina for that type of category of storm or event. And so we're trying to get back to that. Is this an event that is overwhelming state and local resources? And then can we now bring in federal resources to be able to not supplant, but support and lift up state and local governments that are having their worst day?
You know, it is crazy to think about 20 years having passed. I mean, it makes me feel very, very old, because I can very vividly remember I was in law school and my mom was on the coast, and at that time cell phone service was bad, so you couldn't reach anybody. And she lived in a low-lying area. We weren't sure if she'd gotten out or not, and just sort of that panic of all that, the uncertainty of all that. And then just the incredible bounce back of Mississippi. And you're right. I mean, I should have mentioned Senator Lott as well.
No, I understand. I just wanted to get that in.
Yeah, no, I think
if somebody was listening. Trent would call me this afternoon.
And say, hey, what was
That's right. You forgot me.
But no, if you think about the differences between Louisiana and Mississippi, which I think a lot of people will look back on Katrina and say, well, one state seemed to handle the situation a little bit better than the other. Some of that was a byproduct of the type of damage in each state. but a lot of it was a byproduct of the leadership that was in place.
I was with Haley Barbour this week as we were hosting a Louisiana senator for some events and tours here in Mississippi, looking at our healthcare corridor, by the way, in Flowood, Mississippi. Senator Bill Cassidy was here and interested in how Mississippi is moving forward with some of those healthcare zones and medical corridors. But I just reminded the group that was together that if it had not been for Haley Barbour and his leadership and his relationships with people who were in Washington, we would have never recovered fully from that. And we have. People go to the Gulf Coast. But as you remember, I think the thing that shocked me was the shock of it all. When I finally got to the coast that Wednesday after the storm was on Sunday, if I remember, early into Monday morning. But I went down, I was state auditor then, and drove down to the coast. And just the utter devastation was so shocking. I remember coming out on Highway 90 and not being able to determine where I was at on Highway 90.
Yeah.
All of the homes, all the structures were gone. It was getting into the evening, so there was no lights, no street light. I finally found an Indiana highway patrolman. Now, I could have probably figured out I should go west, and I would find Gulfport, which is eventually what I did.
Yeah.
But it was just such a – I tell people it appeared to be a science fiction movie of 80 miles, 75, 80 miles of coastline, 3 miles in, completely destroyed.
So I had a very similar experience. When I was able to get down there, I had a friend that worked for Mississippi Power, and you'll remember this because they had barbed wire up along the railroad track, and they weren't allowing people down to 90, but this guy worked for the power company, so was able to get me down on 90. Right. And we drove a good ways, and to your point, I mean, I grew up on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, but I didn't know where I was at times because landmarks were just, it was wiped away. It was gone. And I vividly recall a couple of things. One, the smell. Because the Port of Gulfport obviously has a bunch of paper and a lot of chicken.
The chicken bags.
And man, it smelled so bad. And then the other part was, you see these giant casino barges. And I have this great picture where it looks like one of those old aluminum lawn chairs is holding up a casino barge. It was sandwiched just underneath the tip of the barge. And it was one of those things that to this day I look back at it sometimes because it was all just so surreal in that moment. So talk a little bit about, like, as you guys think about FEMA's current operation, well, let me back up.
Yep.
Why was this review council a priority of the president to begin with?
Well, you might remember the president during the campaign had an opportunity to go to North Carolina, and Hurricane Helene and the damage that was there in areas that my family had visited when the children were little. We would often go to Lake Lure in and around Thanksgiving, and so we knew that Bat Cave, Lake Lure area now is just completely devastated. And into that disaster, there did not appear to be a robust response from the federal government. Even the current Democratic governors seem to be unable for it sometime to get the federal government to respond at a level that would have made a difference to the people living in North Carolina. And so the president, and then President Trump, tours that area and promises the people of North Carolina that he's going to do something about that. And I think that was the moment, if you will, the anecdotal event that took place in Donald Trump's life, that he realized we can do a better job. Something needs to happen that is not happening now with FEMA's response to these types of disasters. And so on 24 January, he issued an executive order along with a number of different executive orders. This one did not get a lot of attention initially, but it formed the President's FEMA Review Council. And that went into effect very shortly after that, but it was in February before we finally, not finally, but several weeks later, we were able to file a charter for the council before the United States Congress, which is one of the requirements. And then we went to work on 20 of April with our first meeting in Washington, D.C. That executive order formed this now 11-member council. It is 2 co-chairs, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, and the Secretary of the Department of Defense, Pete Hegseth. So those are the chair. I was initially asked to serve on the council. And I had been auditor, lieutenant governor, and governor during Katrina. I think I had over 20 declared disasters while I was governor. So this is something that goes back to my early days in law enforcement as a first responder. So I was asked to be on the council. A few days before the meeting in Washington, I got a call that said, we'd also like you to be vice chair. Which sort of upped the responsibility and going into that council. But the president wanted to do two things. He wanted to review the current conditions of FEMA. So what are we spending our money on? What kind of efficacy are we getting out of our response? The executive order asked us to review and advise the President of the United States of the current conditions of FEMA and how they responded to past events. And then going forward, how can we improve upon that? How can we make it more effective for states? And I think Texas is a perfect example. Governor Abbott is one of our council members and is a co-chair of one of our subcommittees. Obviously extremely busy. And so on that council, you have Governor Youngkin on the FEMA council, Governor Youngkin of Virginia, Governor Abbott. I've got the mayor of Tampa, of Florida. So she's got a pretty busy day job. She happens to be a Democrat. I'm not mad about that. In fact, I welcome her. She's doing a great job on the council. And the mayor of Miami-Dade is just some of the council members. So they're very busy in their day jobs, but they all have a special experience in response from a municipal level to a state level to a county level as a sheriff and a law enforcement. But we are now looking at how that Texas model worked, bringing in all the resources with not only in FEMA but under the Department of Homeland Security, so the Coast Guard, Corps of Engineers, the immediate response team at FEMA has with a local Nim Kidd, who is emergency management director in Texas. Nim is also a council member and did a remarkable job in what was emotionally one of the most devastating events that we have had. And I can tell you from being able to read the response and the loss of those children, it is just heartbreaking. And I think we've done a good job of responding to that event.
We're talking with former Governor Phil Bryant about his appointment to the FEMA Review Council, obviously something of great interest to Mississippians as we deal with tornadoes and hurricanes and all sorts of natural disasters. We're going to take a brief break right here on the Sit Down, and we'll be right back with Governor Phil Bryant.
Together through the years, together in the future. MPB, your stories, our mission.
Every parent wants their child to grow, to explore, and to dream big. At MPB, we're proud to support families and teachers across Mississippi with trusted educational programming and resources that inspire learning and spark imagination. From PBS Kids favorites to digital tools and early learning support, MPB is here for young minds, engaged classrooms, and families who believe in the power of learning at every age. Empowering families, inspiring learners. MPB, your stories, our mission.
The nation's longest running traveling celebration of traditional arts, the National Folk Festival, comes to downtown Jackson for the first time, November 7th through the 9th. A fun-filled weekend for the entire family, exploring roots, richness, and variety of American culture. Non-stop music and dance, folk life demonstrations, hands-on children's activities, signature Southern foods, crafts, and more showcasing the best of America, the best of Mississippi, all free. We'll see you in November. More at nationalfolkfestival.com.
Listening to The Sit Down with Russ Latino right here on MPB Think Radio. We're talking today with former Governor Phil Bryant, recently appointed as vice chair of the President's FEMA Review Council. You know, you listed off the people who were on that council with you. I mean, some heavy hitters in terms of the positions that they're in. Certainly, the Secretary of Defense is currently busy. Certainly, Secretary Noem is currently busy in her role with the Department of Homeland Security.
And Pete Hegseth. DOD.
Yeah. So, I mean, it strikes me that you're going to be busy.
I absolutely have. And look, this is an unpaid job. So I have 11 volunteers. As I said, 2 of them are governors, and the other ones I've listed, trying to take on this massive responsibility of one of the largest agencies in Washington. This morning, very early, I got the latest budget updates. So for FY 2026, you've got a gross budget authority of $36.2 billion. So $36.2 billion agency, 20,000 employees, 20,000. One of the things that we also talked about, what was encouraging the president to review FEMA is you've had things occur, of course, like Congress develop a housing and shelter plan and put funding in it, which funded illegal immigrants at the Roosevelt Hotel in New York.
Under FEMA's budget?
Under FEMA's budget. Now, you see the people in the Democratic Party and their friends in the media saying, oh, no, it wasn't FEMA, it wasn't disaster money. It wasn't disaster money. Oh, we didn't take FEMA disaster money and house illegals. No, what they did was create a sub-budget category under FEMA's budget and put billions of dollars into it, knowing that FEMA was going to house illegal immigrants in places all over America. The Roosevelt Hotel in New York is the one that got the most interest because it is a luxurious hotel that we are paying FEMA money under the housing and shelter category to house Now, what the president has done recently, you may have noticed, he's also using that money to house illegals in Alligator Alcatraz. So at least that money is going for a better purpose than to house people who crossed our border illegally and now living in the Roosevelt Hotel. So that encouraged him. I want to find out where that money is going to. The headquarters in Washington, D.C., large federal agency, as you can imagine, huge building, housing FEMA has grown over the last 4 years, grew by 300%. In the Washington, D.C. office.
This is something that I think should infuriate both Republicans and Democrats about the way budgets are done in Washington, D.C., right? So the way that happens, right, is you pass an omnibus spending bill and you create, some new pot of money under something that people can't not fund.
That's right.
Right? So it's like, hey, we're gonna have a lot of waste, put it in right here, right next to veterans benefits, or right next to a pay raise for our soldiers.
And we're going to call it housing and shelter.
And you can't vote against that. It's those things aren't being judged on their own merit. It's how we get to a $37 trillion debt in our country, because we're not making decisions individually on the merits of these kinds of things. You mentioned something earlier that really what you're trying to get FEMA back to, or what the president wants to get FEMA back to, is being able to respond to these major events like Katrina, like Hurricane Helene in North Carolina. It strikes me, and this may not be a perfect comparison, but like if you were to look at health insurance, back in the day it was a lot cheaper than what it is now. Well, one of the reasons that it's so expensive is we added more and more things that it covers. And it used to be something that covered, events that you personally couldn't pay out of pocket. Now it pays for everything.
Okay.
So the end result is that it's a lot more expensive. It strikes me that states kind of do the same thing with a program like FEMA, which is, yeah, we just had a storm and maybe it was bad, but we know that we can go to the federal government and get money from the federal government instead of paying for this ourselves. And so we're going to do that because at the end of the day, everybody has to pay for FEMA, not just Mississippi or not just Louisiana.
Exactly. I couldn't have summed it up any better. That's exactly what the president's looking at. FEMA was created for catastrophic events. That's what the term in the code says, for catastrophic events. And then states began to figure out, no, I can get them to pay for a snow bomb. I can get them to pay for a flood. And some of them are at that level, like Texas. But the smaller events, if you will, if we can categorize, and look, when somebody loses their house, it's a disaster. We get that. But states need to manage those events that are manageable under their areas of responsibility. And good governors who know how to manage, like Florida and Texas and Virginia, we're going to Oklahoma soon, they've done so. They've established rainy day funds. State of Mississippi has done a great job of $700 million in a rainy day fund. I helped create that rainy day fund, and what we told legislators is let us set aside some of the revenue for a disaster, for a rainy day, and other responsible states have done the same thing. The problem comes in when the federal government has said, well, I'll take care of that. I've got important congressmen, we can come down and do that. And as I said, like you're saying now, almost $36.2 billion, and that's up from last year's fiscal budget by $3.9 billion. And Russ, you remember, I'm old enough to talk in the days where it was millions we were talking about.
Yeah.
And now billions and trillions. And the human mind really can't even comprehend a trillion. That number is so large. If we lay gold bricks to the moon and back, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about. Just now, you mentioned insurance. So FEMA also took on the National Flood Insurance Program. So if you live on the wet side of the levee, or you live in an area that's prone to flooding and you know it's going to flood and you build your home anyway, we will insure you and we will pay for those losses. The National Flood Insurance Program today is $28 billion in debt. So we have borrowed $28 billion from the federal treasury saying we'll pay it back, and we go and pay for these losses that are in areas that we know are going to flood. They're on a map that says you're in the flood zone. I'm going to build there anyway. And we pay, and you can't get insurance, so we give you insurance. Now the federal government's in the insurance business, which I don't think the founding fathers said, oh, yeah, make sure we got a code in there that says they can be government and be in the insurance business. We don't need to be in the insurance business. And now we're $28 billion in debt.
Yeah, we're financing moral hazard. I mean, it's hard for people to hear, right? Like New Orleans gets hit by Katrina. It's a soup bowl, right? I mean, it's under sea level. And we know it's going to get hit again. But the federal government goes in and refinances the rebuilding of a city that we know will be destroyed again. And I'm not New Orleans is a great city. I'm glad it's there.
Yep.
But at some level, it's like it feels irresponsible to keep financing all of this stuff on debt. It feels like intergenerational theft. Like I worry about my kids and my grandkids and what the country's going to be like. Because at some level, people are like, oh, it's monopoly money. Who cares? Like
right.
we're just printing dollars. You know, inflation is everywhere a monetary problem. Like you create more dollars in the system, the end result is things are more expensive. So if you want to know why things are so much more expensive than they were 10 or 20 years ago, it's because we flooded the system with cheap dollars and devalued our currency.
Exactly right. And if President Trump had not gotten elected, we would have continued to do that. I don't know where the money would have come from, continued borrowing to put more federal money into the system. So what the council is saying, we're looking at best practices. The president, again, wants this to be the very best response that we can. We're looking at things of just now, there are about 60 different programs under FEMA in 30 different federal agencies. So it's a spider web. I've got a chart, but it'd be so hard to show you just now. But all of the agencies that have a disaster component. And so every time you go, you have to fill out a separate form. For HUD, Small Business Administration, fill out the FEMA form. And here you are with your home totally destroyed. Now we're worrying about, can we get temporary housing or direct housing at some point, which is a big problem now in L.A. So we've got our team with the FEMA Council. I'll be leaving here and going on a Zoom with the team at L.A. Because you've got thousands and thousands of homes that were totally destroyed by fire that cannot be rebuilt. And one of the problems is all of the debris that came down. FEMA came in and with other assistance helped move the debris out and trying to get it to landfills. Well, the environmentalists in California are saying, one, we don't want that material in landfill. And number two, you can't build back on that lot because it may have asbestos or other products in it unless you remove 6 inches of the topsoil and replace it with new topsoil. And then we'll give you a building permit.
Yeah.
Well, you're there. Your home's totally destroyed. You probably didn't have enough insurance. A lot of these houses were built in the late 60s and early 70s, and you've got to remove 6 inches of topsoil before you can even start building. You're going to have $1 million along, and there's septic tanks there also that they're just saying, well, you can't have a septic tank anymore. So you could be in $1 million before you ever put the first 2x4 on the ground to start vertical construction.
Yeah, and I saw in one of those neighborhoods that, like, it was Pacific Palisades, I think, only 2 building permits had been issued.
That's right.
Out of like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of homes that had been destroyed, which is just crazy. And then you look at like the situation in San Francisco. There was a very unique example of this, and I may butcher it a little bit, but they have a homeless problem in San Francisco.
I've heard that.
And so there was a conversation about building some outdoor restrooms for people to be able to use outdoor restrooms. And I think the price tag was something like $9 million to build what you and I would think would look essentially like a nice porta potty.
Right.
And there was a company that came in and said, we'll just do it for free. Mm-hmm. Right. And the city of San Francisco said, oh, no, it's still going to cost you $5 million
for a permit.
All the permitting and the engineering and the environmental. And it's like, okay, I'm not against conserving the environment. I'm not against doing things in a responsible way.
Right.
But if you have people defecating on the street, isn't that a bigger environmental hazard than building a porta potty?
You would think.
I'm just, comparatively.
Of course.
It just strikes me that we've lost common sense. And that's not a Republican or Democrat thing. That's just a common sense thing.
It totally is. And again, what the president wants to do is look at all of those agencies and say, can we consolidate that? Can we have a single port of application for it? Because, you start a disaster with FEMA and you end up the next 10 years with HUD. And believe me, I was trying to close HUD projects as governor that had occurred in Katrina 15 years or 10 years earlier. So a decade, we're still trying to negotiate with HUD as what that settlement ought to look like, what portion of the state of Mississippi would bear and what they wouldn't, for example, on the Port of Gulfport. And so those are the things that the president is saying we've got to have a better way than 60 different agencies roughly trying to deal with a cataclysmic event in Mississippi or Louisiana or Vermont. Let me give you one other example. So as we dig into this, you always find these types of things. So there is a funeral assistance program within FEMA. We help bury people. This is 10 years ago. 10 years ago, this program started, and then COVID came along. So for every disaster in the last decade, all the people that died in hurricanes and floods and everything that FEMA covered, we spent $11 million. Not a lot in the federal government helping bury victims of events. Since then, in the last basically 4 years, we spent $3.2 billion on COVID funerals. $3.2 billion. So burying people whose death certificate says death by COVID.
That's nearly 10% of your budget.
Yes. On funerals.
So this goes back to the analogy that I was using earlier about why health insurance got so expensive, right? It's like they decided to start covering so many different things that the end result is there was mission creep. Like the purpose of the product changed,
right,
and it got way more expensive because of that. Mm-hmm. It strikes me that there are probably some people listening who would say, or who are sympathetic to, somebody didn't have the ability to bury their granny. Yeah, let the federal government step in and do that. But at some level,
everybody wanted to be buried.
Sure, and everything you say yes to means that you're saying no to something else. And Haley Barbour, had that line that he'd always said, keep the main thing the main thing. Well,
Yep.
If the point of FEMA is to help after Hurricane Katrina or Hurricane Helene, there are going to be some things that, even if you feel good about them, you might have to say no to.
Have to say no. And you can imagine, I'm not saying this happened, but if I own a funeral home and they come in and go, I was going to pay you for a funeral and I wanted the really most efficient funeral you have, but now because of COVID, FEMA's going to pay for it. I'm going to say some funeral directors would have said, I've got just the coffin for you now.
Sure.
And it doubled in price. That's the way it works in the federal government.
That's how you end up with $800 toilet seats, right?
That's exactly right. And by the way, it took 7,000 FEMA employees to manage that funeral assistance. 7,000 federal workers to manage that funeral assistance program. And I saw someone said, "Oh, FEMA doesn't really need reforming." They just perhaps don't know what Donald J. Trump knows. And what we want to do is the families in Texas, the poor families that are struggling in North Carolina, we want to get assistance to those people and no one else.
We're talking with former Governor Phil Bryant, who's recently been appointed to the FEMA Review Council, serving as vice chair. We've got to take a brief break. We'll come back and maybe shift gears a little bit, talk about some things that happened when you were governor and how life is on the civilian side. You're listening to The Sit Down. We'll be right back.
At the Mississippi Arts and Entertainment Experience in Meridian, we believe in the power of the arts, storytelling, and education, just like Mississippi Public Broadcasting. MPB connects communities across the state with quality programs that inform, inspire, and engage. Their audience is loyal and appreciative of businesses that support public broadcasting, which makes underwriting on MPB a smart investment. Join us in supporting MPB. Learn more at mpbfoundation.org.
Together through the years, together in the future. MPB, your stories, our mission.
Everlasting, the Legacy Podcast, is the official companion podcast to the upcoming MPB original documentary, focusing on the life of Medgar Evers. The companion podcast, hosted by me, Rita Brent, will feature in-depth conversations, extended interviews, and exclusive archive footage not shown in the documentary. Everlasting, the Legacy Podcast, video and audio episodes premiere September 18th. Find it on mpbonline.org or wherever you get your podcasts. MPB, your stories, our mission.
Listening to The Sit Down right here on MPB Think Radio. I'm your host, Russ Latino. We're talking today with former Governor Phil Bryant. Governor Bryant has recently been asked by the president to serve as vice chair of the FEMA Review Council. They're looking at ways to make that entity more efficacious, better in responding to catastrophic events. You know, we were talking during the break, and I'll just say this, that I can't blame governors that take advantage of federal programs.
Oh, of course not.
But
I did it myself.
I can blame the federal programs that aren't mission focused.
Right.
Right. And so at some level, there are things that states should be taking care of that they have the capability of taking care of. And it's like, to your point, okay, well, there was a snowstorm we didn't expect. Let's see if FEMA will cover
right.
the expense.
Right.
It detracts from the core mission. And so I'm curious, as you go through this process, what are you hoping to accomplish? Because I think there's always some skepticism with these types of commissions.
Sure. Yeah, if you talk about it, people want to say, oh, we got a blue ribbon commission. I don't want a blue ribbon. What I want is effect. We want to see those taxpayers' dollars that have been spent to save lives, to protect property. I mean, there's no more important funding than there is for FEMA and disaster relief. And what we want to do is be a partner with the state. We want to be able to say, look, this is going to be federally supported, state managed, and locally directed. And that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
So it's going to be directed. Truth of the matter is the local mayors, the boards of supervisors, the fire chiefs, the police chiefs, they're going to be the first ones on the scene. They're going to have to direct us at FEMA, the federal government, where housing is available, for example. People in Washington, if you've got something in Tylertown, they don't say, oh, I know a place we can rent in Tylertown, but the local mayor will be able to do that. So should be under the direction of the local, being managed by the state. So the state, if you look at those as buckets of where the responsibility should be, and state support, federally supported, federally funded as you can in cooperation, not supplanting what the state's responsibility ought to be, but coming alongside of it in those events that are so catastrophic that it would do great damage to the state, to its budget, if FEMA did not come in and support that. We want to bring private insurance back into the market. We want to stop writing insurance. The state of Tennessee's done a great job with a captive program that they have, where they actually go out and, for example, they insure public assets, courthouses, city halls, which most, honestly, blue states are saying, no, we're not going to do that, because we know the federal government will come in and rebuild the courthouse and rebuild it. And we're going to have press conferences and blame Donald Trump and FEMA if they don't. Where's FEMA? They need to be here. I was in the other day, the courthouse, buying a tag in Hazelhurst, and hanging on the wall is a frame certificate from 1905, I believe, a insurance certificate, a policy where they had insured the brand new courthouse in Hazelhurst for $25,000. That was in 1905. I'm not sure it has insurance on it today. So, yeah, we want to go and say, you need to be responsible for your public assets, your fire departments. Insure those where you can. And, oh, by the way, we will help you. As I said, Tennessee has done it. And what we're proposing now is that they have a reserve fund in Tennessee. If they go out and pay claims to their counties and cities, we might refill a portion of that with federal money. So you've got your reserve fund for your state-managed insurance company, partially refilled by the federal government, so you can go out and get lower premiums for that type of coverage. So there are a lot of unique business technology, for example. One of the things that we do is every time we have a truckload of debris, we've got a monitor, a guy sitting there with a notebook writing down, you've got a full truck. And then there's a FEMA monitor sitting on the other side making sure the other monitor wrote it down properly. And we've got technology today that can look at the Mississippi Gulf Coast and say, I've got 70 miles. I want to look at the amount of debris if it were totally destroyed 3 miles in. And we can tell you with scientific certainty how much debris that ought to be. And then we could put out a pre-event contract to say we want somebody to be able to move 200 million tons of debris if it happens, and you can get a lower cost by that type of management.
These conversations always frustrate me at some level, not based on what you're saying, but just based on how slow government is to adopt new technologies, to change with changing times. Right. I mean, in the private sector, you've got to do it or else you die.
That's right.
And there's so much resistance to change sometimes. Even in Mississippi, some of the computer systems and software that are used by state agencies is like 1990s stuff, right?
It's frightening.
And I think people are always scared of sort of that capital expenditure on that type of technology. But the end result is you end up wasting a lot of money because you don't have the efficiencies built in from technology, right? And so it's a frustrating thing to hear you talk about multiple monitors and
I know. But that's the reason for the review, and we hope we can do it. But you're right. When I was governor, I remember we would have agencies come in, Department of Finance Administration. They would say, we've got a 20-year-old computer system over here, and it's about to go down. If it does, we can't pay anybody for the whole state of Mississippi. So you go to people who work and say, we can't pay you this month, and so it may be next month before you. No, you can't do that.
That's not how that works.
You got to fix that. Yeah. But technology today with the drones that we have, with the satellite capabilities, you just Google Earth. I mean, I can look at my little farm and my barn and pull it up on my iPhone, and I ought to be able to tell you, one, using parametrics, what the insurance coverage for that ought to be, without sending out adjusters and all of those types of people. And then I ought to be able to tell you if it was totally destroyed, what type of effort it would take to remove it and not hire 100 monitors.
So I want to shift a little bit with you and talk a little bit about education, because it's been a topic for the last several years around what they call the Mississippi Miracle. Obviously, if you look at the test scores, it's really impressive what's happened since 2013. I think NAP, when they do their test scores, they break it out by race. And so if you looked at like the white kids in Mississippi, they went from, I think, 50th in the country to way up that food chain,
like 16
or something.
Yeah.
And then amongst African American kids, even better. Like among the states that turn in that data, that level of data, African American kids in Mississippi went from last, I think, to 4th or 5th in the country in terms of those.
We're number 4, I think, now for math for our 4th graders, and reading advancement as well.
So it's
a real thing.
It's an incredible thing. And there have been people who have tried to pick at it a little bit, but when you start to look at the data, it always backs it up. I mean, there have been people who've had to come out and say, like, I was wrong about why this happened. One of the things, and I'll give you a little credit maybe that you won't give yourself. When I look at your tenure as governor, I think the most impressive thing that happened was refocusing on education, and really a package of laws that took place in 2013 that I think put new emphasis on the importance of reading at an early age. Yeah. When you look at, I guess I'm curious, when you look at your tenure, is that one of the proud moments? And like, how do you assess what happened and the effect that it had?
Oh, it absolutely is my proudest moment, and because it has been the most effective. When I was lieutenant governor, I'd go to New York with the ratings bureau, and we always had a difficult bond rating. And I would say, well, we're doing all we can do. We seem to be moving with our budget, and we're in restraints and things. And they would say, yeah, but you've got a terrible education system. And I then realized that was part of the bond rating. So we were spending, not only were we not getting our money's worth in public education at that time, and this was in mid 2008, 2011 time period, but the bond ratings were costing us millions and millions of dollars, and we could do a better job if we had an educated workforce. And so we came back in 2013 or 2012 actually, and started really putting together what is the core of literacy and education and how that will affect education. It was literacy. It was just simply reading. And you just think about it. Everyone said, you learn to read by the 3rd grade, and then you read to learn after that. And we were about 37% of our children in the 3rd grade were reading on the 3rd grade level. I said it was abysmal, and our friends in the media went berserk. Oh, Phil Bryant hates teachers. He hates children. You know how they do. And I said, well, just look at the numbers. So we began I traveled the state. My team traveled the state. Dr. Lori Smith, who was then my education advisor, who now works with Donald J. Trump and Robert Kennedy in early childhood learning. And we began to talk, and it was an easy sale. The MEC, the State Chamber of Commerce, came alongside. Titans of industry in Mississippi said, absolutely, I need an educated workforce. And so we were able to convince the legislature that something dramatic had to happen. Jim Barksdale came along and helped. Even William Winter, I remember calling Governor Winter and sitting down and explaining our literacy program to him, which was a lot of things like phonics, just getting back to basics. And we were going to do away with the square dancing and everything else that you were learning and concentrate on nothing but reading in those early, if we were going to have early childhood learning, it was going to be about literacy. And slowly and certainly those numbers began to change. And what happened was what I always believed to happen. There are no dumb children. They're not born that way. I was a dyslexic child that repeated the third grade. So I understood how important it was to overcome those reading disorders. We brought on reading coaches. We put $100 million into that program. But it was more than that. It was also raising the responsibility of universities to teach those students that want to be teachers, to raise that curriculum to include reading science. And it has been a phenomenon that now people who, one of the slides that we had was some of our media saying how terrible it was and I was going to destroy all the children's self-esteem. And now we show that when I go and speak on the Mississippi Miracle. And it is fun to see that we were right about the children and the parents in Mississippi. If you give them a chance, they will deliver.
Yeah, there's that John F. Kennedy quote that I won't get perfect, but it's something along the lines of, victory has 1,000 fathers, defeat has but one, or defeat is an orphan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me there are a lot of people who deserve credit for what's happened in the last 12 years in Mississippi in terms of public education.
And Tate Reeves, of course, was lieutenant governor at that time and helped
Philip Gunn was in the House,
Speaker of the House. It took a perfect storm.
And at some level too, just obviously families had to buy in. Carrie Wright and Kimono Burke and some of those people that worked at the Department of Education had to be bought in and really drive. And so there's a lot of credit that belongs to teachers in the classroom and administrators. I think the unique thing, though, is there was a catalyst moment where, as a state, we said we're really going to focus on literacy. Right. And I've heard people say, well, the gains are really attributable to William Winter. William Winter was a venerable guy. A lot of people have a lot of respect for him. He clearly cared about education, but we didn't see those gains for 20 years.
Well, of course not.
Right, and so there was a catalyst moment where things started to improve. Lots of people deserve credit. I think you deserve a lot of credit for that. Well, yeah. There's an ongoing conversation about sort of what's next. And I know that President Trump has described school choice as a civil rights issue of our time. He has said that he would like to, by the end of his administration, have every child in the country have access to choice to be able to determine, like, hey, this is the best education setting for me, right? Because every kid's different. It seems like that's happened in states other than Mississippi. So Louisiana did it, Arkansas's done it, Tennessee's done it, Alabama's done it. Florida has always had a robust school choice program, but they just went full universal with ESAs. You were governor at a time where y'all were trying to do education reform and did a lot. Why do you think Mississippi's different than these other southern states that have gone down that road?
One of the things traditionally, and one of our reforms was to remove elected school superintendents, which had become political just dynamics in their district. But the school system in Mississippi is very important on a local level. And some of them do a very good job, some of them do not. And I understand at point where Democrats who are so very close to the education establishment, to people who are having tremendous number of jobs created in their school district, and that's a whole story we could go into. And so they affect the Democratic Party. And, of course, if Donald J. Trump wants something, they're against it. But Republicans who vote against this simply baffle me. I just do not understand it. Not only are they wrong about not allowing parents to simply take their child to a school of their choosing, This is so commonsensical. I think we're going to look back on it one day and say, how dare us stop parents from taking children to a school that fits their child, that will allow their child in. But Republicans in the Senate voting against this it will be something that they will have to bear, I think, with their voters. And Donald J. Trump, I spoke to Linda McMahon. I speak with her quite often, and I spoke to her just a few days ago. And this is an issue that the White House is not going to just simply let go away. We know Donald J. Trump, and if there is a special session call, which I heard the governor this morning say that he's considering that or thinking through that possibility, you're going to see Donald J. Trump weigh in to that, and when he does, it's going to be, he's going to lean into this. He wants this done. He cannot understand why all our other states around Mississippi have done it, and we've got a handful of Republicans in the Mississippi Senate who are stopping this from occurring, and they simply need to understand the importance of this on the future of their political career, but also for the betterment of the children that they represent.
It does increasingly seem like it's a partisan issue. You have Republican states and Republican governors pushing it, and a lot of Democratic opposition. But it's interesting to me because when President Obama was president, he very much was in favor of school choice. And if you saw the early school choice movement, it was in inner cities. It was in New Orleans. It was in
leaders.
Baltimore. It was
That's
in New York
exactly
City.
Right.
And you see, like, the guy who's running for mayor in New York City, who's saying that he's declared war against school choice. And
the communists.
Yeah. So democratic socialist is what he says, right? But so it does seem like it's becoming increasingly partisan. There's been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you for having me.
We've been
Great
talking
show.
with Governor Phil Bryant about his work, both as governor and his work now outside of state politics, working with the Trump administration. We always appreciate our audience for listening. We hope that you were entertained. We hope that you learned something. If you got a little angry, that's okay. If you got a little happy, that's all right too. That's the point. Let's stir up some conversation. The Sit Down is a production of Mississippi Public Broadcasting Think Radio, made possible thanks to generous contributions from listeners just like you. If you enjoy the guests and sit downs we bring each week, please consider contributing to help keep shows like this on the air. Visit mpbonline.org or show your support using the MPB app. Today's show was produced by Germaine Flood with live stream production by Abram Nanny. For my guest, Governor Phil Bryant, I'm Russ Latino. Stay tuned for Southern Remedy right here at 11 a.m. and join us next week for a new episode of The Sit Down, heard only on MPB Think Radio.